Why are esports arenas so hard to design? Why aren't there more of them out there to meet the current and growing market demand for esports? Why are these highly anticipated new game spaces taking so long to make their way into the urban fabrics of our culture? Is it an investing issue? Is it a design standstill? Or is it something bigger? This is not to say that esports spaces are not being conceptualized and planned, but what is being done at the current scale and speed just doesn't meet the growth in the esports and gaming scene at global or local scales. For example, if we focus on the growing market that is gaming as a whole, it's larger than the music and cinema industries combined, and definitely bigger than sports. Yet, we just don't see the proportional equivalent spaces for esports that these other industries have to capitalize on their markets. We can also observe that there is a lack of cultural representation of these very fundamental activities for the millennial, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha generations, which sees gaming as integral to their lives as reading books, watching movies, hearing music, and playing sports. Yet we do not have the same spatial and building representation in our cities like we do with libraries, music venues, theaters, and sports stadiums, which facilitate the public celebration of these activities, but also serve as cultural symbols. So much that every major city needs to have an entertainment and art district, with all of these buildings as key components of those districts that serve as a major point of social pride and also economic drivers in that city. As mentioned, it is not that we're not trying to actively crack the difficult puzzle that is creating esports spaces, but the way that we are going about it, from an architectural, spatial standpoint at least, is just not yielding the expected results evident by the lack of these spaces in our cities. At the moment, I have observed that our current approach to creating these esports spaces can be broken down into three major categories. First category is where we are adapting to whatever space is already built and available. A warehouse, a space in a mall, an old theater, whatever. Ignoring that the basic geometry of these spaces, as well as their locations, were selected and designed for a different purpose altogether, and therefore it will not meet the unique and subtle but fundamental requirements for an esports space. This becomes evident by the number of esports ventures that open up and close in these types of spaces. The second category is emulation, where we are copy and pasting the sports stadium archetype in particular, and sometimes the music venue for the most part, without fully understanding that these archetype designs were conceived to facilitate a very specific physical spectating experience that doesn't quite match up to meet the specifics that make or break the esports spectating experience. And the third category is where we are innovating, where we are trying different things, exploring and stretching the boundaries of our imagination, but still lacking fundamental understanding of what exactly composes this optimal building or space for esports, which results in a lot of these ideas staying on paper and never being built for one reason or another. And all of this is confirmed when the industry itself is not satisfied with a model and or a space that feels like the solution. The broadcasters, the audiovisual designers, event planners, lighting designers, and even players and spectators all feel like we haven't figured it out yet, and we're just making do with what we're given, which is unfortunate, but also exciting from a design standpoint. This means that there is an opportunity to understand this emergent building typology and explore it to define how to design it. One of the issues is that investors require an ever-growing increase on expediency of the design and construction process of a building under a debt-based economy, as inflation, via currency debasement, is always out on the hunt, reducing the margins of profit as time goes on. Therefore, there is no time to innovate, just copy and paste. This leaves us with two basic approaches that the market operates in. One option is where everything is predefined, and set on a company manual, and it is the architect's job to adapt everything that has already been predefined to its new context, that particular unique lot it will be built on. Think of franchise architecture like Chick-fil-A or Burger King. And this happens because the architecture needs to reflect the branding and a consistent, unified expression so it is easily identified by the consumers wherever they encounter it, capitalizing on the psychology of familiarity to capture more sales. The second approach is where the industry has already figured out where exactly it can be creative and where it cannot be creative when working with specific known building typologies to be able to meet timelines and profit demands. Like a hotel, for example, where the investors have a very good idea of how many rooms, what type of rooms, and all the amenities they want for that project to be profitable, as well as a programmatic assembly, needing minimal input from the architect, the creative side, while the architect can really only be creative with the skin of the building and the entrance and just very specific components. The issue with these two main market approaches in our modern economy is that neither is really conducive for innovation, a process that requires trial and error, which translates into time, which itself translates into money, a resource that inflation does not permit you to have too much of for very long. This, in turn, makes investors pass up the risk but also the opportunity to capitalize on innovation, preferring to lean on fast emulation and production of what has already been figured out and is the standard and therefore affordable, which might be a good short-term financial move, but a poor one for civilization as a whole. I wonder if there is a way to fix this. This lack of time really just leaves investors and designers with one tool at their disposal to just copy and slightly modify what is already known. In this case, the sports stadium. But in reality, emulating the sports stadium is like when the car started to emerge and it looked a lot like a carriage, just without the horse. Fast forward a century, and the car design is its own thing, specialized for the unique experience of driving a combustion engine, not a horse. There are overlaps between the sports stadium and the eSports arena, just like there are overlaps between the horse carriage and the Lamborghini. That does not mean that the overlaps are sufficient to satisfy the new design direction. So, this begs the question. What are the overlaps and the tension points between these two archetypes? If we approach this from a first principles perspective, both spaces/buildings are facilitating the physical gathering of a large number of people to spectate something together. We can note that this concept applies for watching a game of basketball as much as it does witnessing and hearing an orchestra. Yet, we recognize that even though the overlap of gathering a lot of people in a single space to watch something together is a very strong categorical force, their tensions, their differences to optimize each particular type of viewing experience is strong enough that we have to have specialized buildings to satisfy each one separately. We even take this a step further by differentiating buildings from one sport to another, like having different basketball, soccer, and football stadiums. But somehow, we think that we don't need a specialized esports spectating and playing space because it's just close enough to what we already have in the sports stadium. I can even take it a step further and argue that we might need a hyper-specialized space depending on genre of games, just like we do for sports. But don't worry, I won't. At least not in this video, as I am trying to make videos more succinct, even though I am failing. Let's dive a little bit deeper into what are the biggest differentiating factors between the esports arena and any other spectating space or building. The first thing we need to understand is that fundamentally, esports is a digital phenomena that the esports arena building is trying to figure out how to translate into the physical realm. At the crux of it, we are trying to understand how to take something that is inherently and optimized for the digital experience into the physical realm. which is curious as it is going in the contrary direction of everything else that is physical and is being explored to understand how to digitize in some way or another. Everything from sports to music events. Understanding this transition of dimensions from the digital to the physical is where I believe lies the key to unravel the puzzle that is the esports arena. At the bare minimum, it is the right starting point. For example, notice how every other industry that is in this shifting of dimensions is primarily going in the direction of turning something that was inherently physical into something of a digital experience, which, don't get me wrong, it has its own challenges, but all those other areas, the sports, the music events, the social gatherings, are all working towards the same goal. In one way or another, they can learn from each other even if they are competing against each other in specific areas. The endeavor of the esports arena finds itself being the only one going in the other direction, from digital to physical. This means that there are less resources exploring and experimenting in this direction, which means less knowledge and experience is being generated and gathered to figure out this particular transition, which explains why the slow development in the efforts, at least compared to its previously mentioned counterparts in other industries. After understanding the key role that shifting from the digital realm to the physical realm play in this whole exercise, we can now better focus on it to break it down and get some further key insights. I have identified three major categories of tension that need to be understood within this fundamental shift. The first one is the transition of private versus public. Gaming, as a whole, tends to be an activity that for the most part is executed in the private sphere of someone's life, especially since the downfall of arcades. Even though gaming is greatly shared with a vast number of people through streaming channels, the socializing and sharing part is happening through the digital layer. But the person itself tends to be in a private space. The physical component of that equation is private in nature. Of course, there are streaming studios that show people playing, and there are events that show people playing. But all of this is part of this transition that is happening and that we need to understand further. We are taking something that was created and optimized and developed as inherently a private activity that you either did alone or with a few close friends, and we are now expanding it and putting it at the forefront of the public eye in a major way. The social dynamics change from creating strong personal bonds to experiencing the euphoria and fiero of a great tournament moment. The second transition that we need to understand is personalized versus collective. Because of the private nature of the gaming scene, a lot of the experience can be highly customizable. Everything from the computer parts that are to my technical and aesthetic specification and liking, to the space itself being particularly highly comfortable to one person in specific, me, be it the desk and chair, LED lights, room decoration, room temperature, keyboards, mouse, headset, you name it. We are leaving all of that for a collective experience, an experience that is no longer specifically tailored just for one person. So, there is going to be a high barrier that designers and event planners need to clear to make someone want to leave their highly tailored gaming space for a generic collective experience that they need to drive to and pay to enter. Is the social celebration through these collective gatherings set up in a way that is worth leaving the highly personalized spaces? The third category is active versus passive. In contrast with other types of events and their attendees, gamers want to play. They do not just want to sit, watch, and leave. Granted, they want to watch and have an optimal viewing experience of the tournament they came to spectate. But in contrast with a music event or sports game, for example, where the attendees are passively watching, gamers want to participate in some form or way. There is an expectation of participation, not in the tournament itself, but in the games. Another contrast in the space is that esports, at least right now, is first about the game and then about the start players, in contrast with, say, sports. That is why we tend to see a lot of esports events that have a tournament arena, but also have a lot of play spaces adjacent to these arenas so fans can also play the games they came to watch. All of these misconceptions and lack of understanding or even awareness of these fundamental variables are coupled with yet another obstacle that impedes to a certain degree the achievement of the esports arena. That is the generational barrier of investors. The majority of investors, those who hold the capital to invest in these types of projects, at least for the moment, they are from a different generation, either baby boomers or Gen Xers. And these generations in particular, for the most part, do not understand gaming or its appeal. They grew up in a generation where gaming was non-existent or it was emerging and it was seen in a derogatory way, like being a waste of time. So even though they can see the numbers of market statistics and market analyses reflecting that people want these spaces and there is some money to be made here, they themselves do not understand it. And to be a good investor, you have to understand what you are investing on. So therefore, they do not invest in this space because they do not understand the space. And when they do invest, they invest in half-measure ways to test out the waters. What is the issue with this? That a lot of the resources end up going towards the technical side, the computers and equipments, the lights and screens, and none to the spaces. Space is one of those things that is seldom understood because it is hard to perceive its importance, like fish in water. Add to that building spaces, constructing them, or remodeling them is an expensive and a relatively long process. All of this ends up having the investor give money to a team that ends up trying this venture in a suboptimal space. A weird space in a dark corner of a mall because it was cheap and perceived to be good enough. Or a faraway warehouse, or a sports stadium. The venture ends up not being good enough for people to leave their highly comfortable, private, personalized setup at home for a suboptimal pay-to-enter drive-to space. Of course, it's not going to work. But the investor and others around him take this failure as a data point and mark it as an unprofitable venture, which creates a negative feedback loop to be able to arrive as a culture or even civilization to these new spaces and buildings. This video broke down what I have identified as the major obstacles to be resolved to be able to correctly position ourselves to be able to design the optimal esports arena, not as a copy-paste stadium or a good enough venue, but the optimal experience of esports in the physical realm. By no means is this a final version. This is a work in progress framework I am developing. So make sure you comment down below if I missed something or you have something to add to one of the points that I have mentioned. As always, I read and answer all the comments and I'm always looking forward to a good design conversation. In the next video of this series, I will dive deeper into all the particular challenges and creative opportunities I have identified that become available to explore for this particularly emergent building typology. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Simon and on this channel I talk about everything design, giving non-designers a window into the design world and a wider view of the design world to fellow designers. Here, I talk about architecture, game design, product design. I do design breakdowns, discuss design theory and philosophy, as well as the designer's lifestyle. So make sure you subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my upcoming videos. Make sure to click that like button if you enjoy the video and share this video with someone else. Watch time is the most important metric to be able to grow here on YouTube right now, and I want to grow. Help me grow. With that said, thank you for watching the video, and I will see you on the next one.